Number one, who would have ever thought that we would have 110 softball players out here for a non-sanctioned event?
I did! It's the beer!
I keep telling Paul it was all because of him, but he keeps saying it was because of the beer. But it's both. Paul, this day is for you, but it's also for all the other senior softball players here.
How many guys here over 60?
Yeah, brother!
Keep your hands up.
Yeah, brother!
How many over 60?
How many play like it?
How many over 65?
Yeah!
65. You're not 65. You're not even, you're what, 15? 70. Oh, they're dwindling. 75.
I get to take mine down finally.
Malone, your hand in up.
Come on, Malone.
75.
75. We got George over there.
George.
Labrada.
Labrada, remember to put your hand up. 80?
We had 80s left. Wilbur left.
Let's see, 85.
Wilbur's over here!
Wilbur's still there.
Wilbur?
Keep it up, Wilbur. Wilbur's arm getting tired.
Hey, guys, this is Wilbur Bruce. He bats leadoff on Wednesday, and he's hitting about 750. That is no joke. Okay, well, I think that pretty much leaves...
That kind of falls right into the pattern here.
Leaves Paul as the senior. And I believe next June, is this right? His family can tell me this. Is next June he's 90?
This June.
This June
in
he's
2
90?
weeks.
Yep, June 11th.
2 weeks.
Let's have a hand for Paul.
Oh, yeah.
And also will Paul's family stand up? If you're in Paul's family, go ahead, admit it. Stand up. Okay. Paul, sit down, please. Club standing around with some of the officers. I don't think he was a full bird colonel yet. And they're talking. They're having a beer. And all of a sudden, one of the officers looks down at Paul's where Paul was standing, and there's a big pool of blood. And Paul's just having his beer, just standing around talking. And one of the colonels says, "Paul, I think that's you bleeding." So Paul had no idea. This is a true story, isn't it? Anyway, it sure sounded good, but the whole irony was he didn't tell me this until after the article was printed. But again, if you haven't met Paul, go on over. One of the best guys you'll ever meet, and we're trying to get him back at least on Wednesday morning to play.
I got one story to tell about Paul, and it really was an inspiration to me to keep playing, because when I first started, my wife saw an ad in the paper that the 60s played on Wednesday. So I sat around, and finally my birthday happened to be on a Wednesday that I turned 60, and me, God's gift to softball, was going to show up and be a hero. It didn't work that way. I get out there and was introduced to Leo Miller. We took batting practice, and immediately I wasn't on his team. I went over to the Overhill team, which was Paul's team, and met the guys over there. So they wanted to bat me leadoff since I was the youngest guy there. First time out of the box, I pulled a hamstring.
I know this about Paul.
They put a 74-year-old guy in to run for this 60 guy, and I come back to the bench, sit by Paul, dejected and all, and he told me, he said, "Look, that happens to all of them out here, the new guys that come out, so they pull something, but they don't come back." He said, "You come back." So I came back, just like Paul said, and I sat on the bench for a month or two healing by Paul, and I learned a lot about this game from Paul, how long he'd been involved, and so that kept me coming back. So I'm sure a lot of you have some stories that can be told and cleaned up a little about Paul and his softball things. And after that, I also knew that they went to Holly and Dolly's on Wednesdays after the game. Paul was always the last one to leave, I heard, because I was already gone. So Paul closed them up, and I do have some well wishes for them. They wanted to be here, but this happens to be the one day of the week they're getting to work this week at their namesake restaurant. So if anyone else has any Paul Malone stories.
It wasn't until after being around certain ball players and that he got over himself. Also would like one of my memories with Paul and his buddy Haphazard. Haphazard was born in 1923 like Paul Malone, a month apart. They lived a couple blocks apart from one another. And Paul used to pick Hap up for the ball games. And so here are these two guys on a Saturday morning. Paul is in his 1963 Plymouth. Correct, Paul? And by the way, it's a convertible. And if you looked at these gentlemen, you knew they were getting coffee and rolls for the ladies on a Saturday morning. But here they come into the ballpark, these two, and I'm a new young dude, and I was just amazed that here these guys come.
Actually, that last story that Chuck told was true. I didn't have much of a vocabulary, and it really left us in there. We sat there for 15 minutes trying to figure out what that word, exonerated?
What does that mean?
Yeah. Hell, I was only, what, 12 years old or something? But anyway, this is overwhelming. It's very humiliating. It's very humbling. I was close.
There's that vocabulary, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, after all.
Exonerated and humiliated. And you had a few beers.
Oh, it's a great crowd. I wish I could do stand-up, but forget it. Anyway, there was an interesting story that I thought I could share with you. I go back, in case some of you that don't know, and I think a lot of you don't know, because you're all young and you join a league, and I think that's marvelous. But before this even started, and we're talking about the middle 80s and before, there was no daytime softball here. We all played at night. And finally, Leo Miller and a few of his friends, Hap Hazard, Doug Preston, some other guys, decided there ought to be some. There's enough people and we're interested. We're retired, a lot of us, and we can play in the daytime. And they got this whole thing together. And finally, coincidentally, they built this area here. And we were the first teams to play here, and certainly in the daytime, and I think essentially we're about the only team that plays here during the daytime. But it was through their efforts and a great group of people, and we had paid umpires and so on. And that's another thing, we pioneered no paid umpires. I think it's to their credit. I think Leo was telling me he's the one that did the double home plate and some other things. I think a lot of these ideas may have been stolen from other leagues and so on. Different balls, that's right. There were many things that were done. But we've laid the groundwork, I think, for something that's really good, that really needed. You couldn't get a game up between Osceola County and Volusia and Seminole. We had to travel around, and some of the women would, when we came in as a team from here, under Leo's auspices and coordination, the women would have a barbecue for us or something like that. And it finally settled down here. One of the things I thought was interesting, the guys that coordinated, made all these county calls. It never occurred to anybody, but in those days, and we're talking about the 80s, long distance calls. And they spent a lot of money talking, and no one ever compensated for it. Well, listen, you've been wonderful, really humbling, overwhelming, and I appreciate it. A lot of you I don't know, I've never met. But I think it's wonderful you're here, and you're with a great group, and you're going to contribute to it being a much better group, much more organization. I don't know how much of that. That's like government. You don't need too much of that. but anyway, it's just overwhelming for a guy like myself. I'm not a hero. I'm just one of you, believe me. And again, thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Now go get your beer.